All right, my friends, I'm going to share with you more proof that retirees spend less in retirement. They consume less than what we've been led to believe. And unfortunately, we got to go back. This is 2001, a paper done in 2001 that you'll find interesting. It's incredible, actually, informative. And this just shows you, again, the level of the research that has come down the pike to prove that people aren't saving enough. And yet we've had lots of studies actually previously that show the exact opposite. In fact, this one will show you the level of consumption decline in retirement is across the board. What this paper is going to try to explain is they're going to use what's called the life cycle theory of why what people do in retirement relative before retirement. Do they spend more or less based on their previous circumstances? And the life cycle theory kind of says if A is the beginning, the input, B is the output. A is this, B is that. And what these guys are going to do is simply no validity to that whatsoever. And we're going to look at a bunch of different ways you can look at that. But the conclusion, though, is pretty simple. Across the board, consumption declines, and remarkably in retirement. Now, there's one group where it doesn't, and I'll get into that. But everybody else, it does, and it does significantly as well. And so you can't use the typical life cycle idea, the thesis or the hypothesis maybe, to say, retirement means more consumption because of X, Y, Z. There's no input that can lead to that output. Thus, there's no correlation. And thus, you have to look at things differently when it comes to your own retirement and stop looking at it as I need this magic number to generate me this much income. No. Yes, you're looking at backwards. You got to look at the start as how much will I consume in retirement, not how much will my assets provide me. That's secondary. The input is your consumption. And again, here's more proof of the consumption being declined. Now, I might split this. This is a critical paper. I might split this up in two. The work done in this has won Nobel Prize for people. No other way around. I don't think these guys have it, but other people that they cite quite a bit have. Richard Thaler, Gary Becker, and things. And it's incredibly important. Now, let me just give you the crib notes and some of the stuff you're going to see here. And you might say, oh, we're not going to dive into the math behind all this because I don't know it. It bores me. I mean, look at these. I don't know what all this stuff means. I didn't take econometrics in college. Didn't want to. I wanted to be economics because I think there's some validity to just basic people's attitudes when it comes to finance. For sure, economic decisions you make have more to do with just your own instinctiveness as opposed to be able to model it in some kind of econometrics way. But there is still some validity, lots of validity actually, for other people to be able to do that and report back on it so the layman like me can understand it and report back too. All right. So let's dive right into this. This is from Bernheim, Skinner, and Steven Weinberg, and ironically enough is published September 2001. All right, so even among households with similar socioeconomic characteristics, savings and wealth vary considerably. Life cycle models attribute this variation to differences in time preference rates, risk tolerance, exposure to uncertainty, relative taste for work and leisure at advanced ages, and income replacement rates. These factors have testable implications concerning the relationship between accumulated wealth and the shape of the consumption profile. Using the panel study of income dynamics, PSID, and the Consumer Expenditure Survey, CES, we find little support of these implications. The data are instead consistent with rules of thumb, mental accounting, or hyperbolic discounting theories of wealth accumulations. Thus, little support of the life cycle theories that the input will lead to a certain output. I love it, man. And I know that might seem, what the hell is I'm talking about? We're going to dive into that. Don't get me wrong. We're going to dive into it because it's so important to understand this. And yes, even for you, guy with $50,000 a year, why do I want to pay attention to these professors? Because everything you've been told up to this point has been academic, supposed research that says, oh, we need $1.8 million to retire. Says who? Says, I don't know. That's just what the rule of thumb has been. Why? Why is that? Anyway, so let's go into it. Let's see where I want to talk about. Okay. Various factors could in principle account for the observed variation in savings for retirement within the context of the standard life cycle models. With rational, far-sighted optimization. No one has that. Households may differ with respect to patience, the rate of pure time preference, risk tolerance, exposure to uncertainty, health status, perceived life expectancies, relative taste for good, complementary with leisure at advanced ages, level of work-related expenses, lifetime earnings, or income replacement rates. In this paper, we test the presence of those factors, and we don't find they exist. All right, which is pretty freaking awesome. All right, let's keep going down here. Oops, one's okay. Here. So they have three basic factors. Each category has a distinctive and testable empirical implication. Factors in the first category create systematic correlations between a household's wealth and its average consumption rate. So you get X amount of dollars, your average consumption rate would be that. That's the thesis. For example, if differences in savings result from differences in patience, those who save more should exhibit higher consumption growth factors, or growth rates, excuse me. Factors in the second category create systematic correlations between wealth and one-time changes in consumption at retirement. For example, households with higher work-related expenses should accumulate less and experience larger declines in measured consumption at retirement. Likewise, an unexpected early premature retirement, i.e. getting laid off, should depress consumption by forcing the retiree to revise his or her expectations at retirement. So let's talk about those two things real quick. Actually, let's go to the third. Factors in the third category give rise to systematic correlations between accumulated wealth and the level of consumptions. Households with strong bequest motives, for example, should tend to consume less throughout the life cycle. All right, so factor number one, you get higher accumulated wealth. Let's just go back real quick. This is part of the life cycle thesis. Factor number one, households' wealth and your average consumption growth rate. All right, so I'm going to consume as my average consumption growth rate will grow according to my household wealth, if that makes sense. So the higher my household wealth, the more my average consumption growth rate should be the result. The number two factor, though, is interesting. That if you get laid off, for instance, you're going to spend less because, like, man, I got all this money, and then boom, I don't have all this money coming in. What do I do? I'm going to spend less. And that would inherently make some sense for sure. Like, look, I have a big significant drop off at retirement because I'm being forced upon me. And that there is some validity to that. And number three, I kind of think is one of the other factors. You'll spend less in order to leave more, i.e. what I say is I'm going to fly coach so my kids can fly first class. So I'm going to consume less in order to leave more to my heirs. All right, so those are the three factors. Our first central finding is that there is essentially no relationship between accumulated wealth and consumption growth rates, either prior to retirement or at retirement or in retirement. This suggests a wide range of factors failed to provide even contributory explanations for the observed variations in accumulated wealth. Thus, the more your wealth increases, there is no correlation between your consumption growth rates at all. None. All right, so we can kind of put that to the side. The more you make or the more you accumulate, the more your net worth is, the more you spend. There's just no correlation between the two. Our second central finding, again, let's go back to one because this is actually, I think it makes sense. For factors, second category, systematic correlations between wealth and one-time changes in consumption at retirement. For example, households with higher work-related expenses should accumulate less wealth and experience larger declines in consumption. Again, I'm spending a lot of money to commute. I'm spending a lot of money at work-related food. I'm getting fancy ties and suits and whatnot. I'm eating out a lot at work, and now I'm no longer working. I should consume less because my consumption pre-retirement, a lot of that was based on work-related activities. Or the second part of the factor, number two, is that I got laid off, and then I should have less consumption simply because I got to make sure that I don't have any income coming in to maintain my level of consumption. Again, that would be being forced. Your consumption is just being forced. Our second finding is the existence of a correlation between wealth and the decline in consumption at retirement. We just talked about that. This is superficially consistent with the second category. However, these hypotheses do not survive closer scrutiny. The impact on retirement on work-related expenses and leisure substitutes is too small to explain the decline in consumption. And other expenditures also fall sharply. So basically, all your expenditures on getting your Italian suits and eating out and your your commute and whatnot, they drop significantly, but so do other things as well. So we can't attribute, again, this input for that output simply because while that is happening, there's other things happening as well. Nor is our second finding the consequence of unanticipated events that affect the timing of retirement. The pattern persists even when we remove these effects statistically. Taken together, our first two findings imply that a broad range of standard lifestyle considerations are collectively incapable of accounting for the observed variation in wealth holding constant income profiles. All right. Now, that's pretty interesting. So let's keep going down. Difference in okay. Oh, this is interesting. Difference in income profile should also contribute to a variation in wealth, you would think. For instance, households with relatively generous pensions and Social Security benefits should accumulate less wealth according to the life cycle model throughout retirement, because they're saying, I don't need to save as much because I have a big fat pension and Social Security, so I'm going to consume more while I'm working and save less. Yet in practice, we find that households with lower income replacement rates do not have significantly higher wealth income ratios. So I need less income to replace my income because when I retire, because I'm getting it from my pension and my Social Security, but there's no correlation between that and my level of wealth accumulated, none whatsoever. One can explain this finding in the context of life cycle theory that if pension coverage is correlated with taste for savings. However, it's much more difficult to account for the observed pattern in light of our third central finding. The discontinuous drop in consumption at retirement is larger for households with less generous pensions and Social Security benefits. All right, so the discontinuous drop in retirement is large for consumption in retirement is larger for households with relatively less generous pensions and Social Security benefits. Those are the people you would think have saved more, and those are the people you think then, because they have more savings, would be able to consume more in retirement, or at least drop less relative to people with big pensions and Social Security benefits. It would make sense, you say, at the end of the day, the people who save the most, all right, would have enough assets to cover their retirement income ratios, and thus you wouldn't see this big a drop as the people who save the least, but yet we do. Interesting. All right, so this paper is related to several previous studies that find consumption declines sharply as households move into retirement. One paper infers that consumption at retirement is not sustainable. Kotlikov disputes this conclusion. I already talked about that paper yesterday. Another paper finds that among Canadians, consumption at retirement falls more sharply for blue-collar workers than white-collar workers. Another paper links a decline in non-medical consumption at retirement to unexpected and involuntary job loss, often resulting from health problems. Another paper tracks consumption and earnings of synthetic British cohorts through retirement years and document a sharp drop in average consumption at age 65. They argue that this finding is difficult to explain with reference to conventional economic factors. Interesting, huh? One paper maintains that it's possible to account for the observed variation in wealth using a life cycle model with heterogeneous earnings chocks and pension coverage. However, their model presupposes consumption smoothing at retirement, which is inconsistent with these guys' models. Man, I'm telling you, man, it's all right. Let's keep going down. Let's see. I want to talk about. Let's tell you. Well, let me pause a moment to share with you a couple things. Here's Richard Thaler and Hersh Sheffrin, and they're citing some work by Thaler. Thaler has won a Nobel Prize in economics based on studies just like this. I mean, this isn't small potato stuff that that's thrown in the freaking gutter getting dusty. I mean, in the drawer. This is real stuff that has won people millions of dollars in economic theories and prizes. And here we go, Gary Becker. Gary Becker is another Nobel Prize winner as well. So Becker work is factors that can generate sharp changes in consumption at retirement include the existence of work-related expenses or preferences for leisure activity, leisure substitutes or compensations. I'm not going to get into that much here, but I mean, here's Thaler again, and so far we focused exclusively So far, we focus exclusively on the standard life cycle framework, additional considerations, and alternative behavioral models, Richard Thaler. When you actually hear how this stuff plays out by some of the people who can give us understanding of what these economics, I mean, here's some equations. It says, oh, that makes sense. And these guys won Nobel Prizes for that. It's common sense, but you got to hear it common sense. You got to hear it first, and you say, oh, that makes sense. But until then, it's left up for these equations. I mean, look at this. Look at these equations here. All right, so here's an equation. I'll move myself out of the way here. Number 5. I mean, I don't even know what all that stuff is. But look, number 5, if that, we're going to talk about that equation right there. Hold on just a second. Equation 5, whatever that was, implies that like variations in the pure rate of time discount, variations in perceived longevity, i.e. survival probabilities, income uncertainty, and taste for precaution rotate the consumption profile. So these 3 inputs will have these outputs. Thus, variations in wealth accumulation that result from any of the factors we just talked about should manifest themselves through positive correlations, i.e., I make more money, that's one of my inputs I should have, and I have less risk affiliated with my concern about retirement for survival. I should then see positive correlation with increased consumption. The absence of such correlations, though, would be inconsistent with that hypothesis that these factors contribute to the observed variation in wealth. It's interesting, I'm telling you. So let's keep going down. We get lots of we have a variation in retirement wealth may also result from unexpected events that affect the timing of retirement. Again, it's kind of being forced on you, such as a job loss. This is pretty interesting. For those who retire unexpectedly early and as a consequence retire with less than desired wealth, retirement coincides with the news of a negative shock to permanent income. This gives rise to a negative correlation between retirement wealth and a decline in consumption at retirement. That's the hypothesis. One can test this hypothesis by studying residual changes in retirement consumption after controlling for the unexpected shocks. We elaborate on this later on. Now, that is going back to Ty Brickey, who I love the guy. He wrote this paper that got me thinking about this. The BLS numbers of the reality retirement spending with the declining amount of spending, i.e. consumption in retirement. No one was talking about that other than some obscure academics and obscure Nobel Prize winners. Whatever. And then Jonathan Clements from the Wall Street Journal said, no, these people are declining basically because they're being forced to reduce their spending, i.e. their retirement shock, they got laid off, or they're running out of money. That's the hypothesis that Clements stated. He didn't say it explicitly like that, but he did. He said basically these people, the reason consumption is going down is because they're being forced to. And thus, the input is X, forced retirement. The output would be Y, decline in consumption. Or the income is X, increasing wealth in retirement. The output should then be Y, which is increasing consumption. And according to these guys in this paper, it's completely non-correlated. All right, so I want to go back to the news here. This is interesting. Suppose, for example, that saving is somewhat haphazard, but that each individual evaluates their finances upon reaching retirement, adjusting spending as necessary to accommodate resources. In that case, the adequacy of savings at retirement is news, all right? Those with bad news, i.e. inadequate savings, would look at their newspaper. They're going to say, oh, no, I don't have very good savings, and thus I should decrease my consumption. For those that good news, look at the newspaper and say, yeah, I got millions of dollars, and thus I should increase my consumption because bad news leads to decreasing in consumption. Good news leads to increasing consumption. Alternatively, individuals may regard this right here is huge. Alternatively, and this will be, I'm going to stop it. I'm going to go to part 2 here. Just make sure I can save these things. So this will be the last one we'll talk about, and then we'll go to part 2. Alternatively, individuals may regard current income as more spendable than assets, particularly those held in retirement accounts. And that is Richard Thaler, part of his premise where he won the Nobel Prize. Consumption might then decline at retirement because consumption might then decline at retirement simply because current income falls. If individuals differ in the extent which they exercise self-discipline over spendable funds, then those with little self-discipline should accumulate less wealth for retirement and experience. Okay, all I want to say is I find this incredibly important. Huge. You have income coming in. you're spending that income regularly. Can't tell if it stopped on me or not. Let's see. Let me try. I got to pause right here. I'm going to say this. I just want to see if it stopped. So important. I got to say it again. Individuals may regard current income as more spendable than assets, particularly those held in retirement accounts or converted into annuities. So let me, this is happening to me right now. All right, so you got income coming in. You know, you make 100,000 a year. You're like, man, I got income coming in. Yeah, I know I could lose my job or not, but the income is a liquid account, a liquid amount of money coming in, coming in, coming in, coming in. As long as it comes in, I'm pretty comfortable in spending it because it's liquid coming in. It's coming in, going out door, coming in, going out door. No problem there at all. What happens when the income stops coming in? Well, now you're going into assets. Assets can't be replaced. They can't. You're taking down. This is the whole point. I don't want to touch my principal. I'm tapping into my assets. If I spend those assets and they don't grow relative to how much I spend, I will have less assets in the future, which means I could run out of money. You could run out of money too, Josh, by your income if you got laid off. No, I get that. And I'll worry about that at a point. But right now, I got the income coming in. I'm not worried about it. If at that point comes where I get laid off or lose my job or something like that, then inherently I will spend less income because at that case, I'm dipping into my principal, my assets, and I don't want to do that. So let me give you an example. I was making good money last couple of years. All right. So I stopped making good money to start my business doing this. Now I have assets. I have no income. So very, very gingerly do I sell assets in order to finance our consumption. Does that make sense? Now, I wasn't doing that gingerly when I had a good income, even though we weren't living high. I mean, we have a nice house. We're not without, let's put it that way. But I was a whole lot more eager and willing to buy something on Amazon, even if it's just at a whim, than I am now, because we have the income is solely coming from our assets. And every time I sell something, in my back of my mind is nerve-wracking. You can say, that means I can't sell that thing in the future to generate an income. And what happens if I have to sell everything and I no longer have those things to sell? All right. That's a scary proposition. And that says to yourself, I want to be very, very, again, gingerly before I sell an asset to consume, whereas before I would have income where I can consume. I hope that makes sense. That's huge. And it won Thaler Nobel Prize for that kind of work. And I find it incredible. All right, so let's stop there. I want to go now. We're going to do part 2, and we're going to talk about the findings from this guy. I'm telling you, this is incredibly, incredibly important, okay? All right, so let's stop there. Stay tuned for part 2, and we'll see you next time. Thanks now.